Welcome to the legislative process training. This is the portion of the training that I am titling things that took me way too long to learn, but I was always too embarrassed to ask about. So we're going to be talking about the website and specifically like the bill pages and the N drive, and just kind of going through how those things can really assist you in navigating the legislative process. I'm starting with this very basic section. I assume that a lot of people will know these things, but if you did know these things and you now learn them, your secret is safe with me. So the first thing I'm going to do is the very basic, we're going to go to a bill page. So I'm going to share my screen. So as you look at it, obviously the easiest way to look for a bill is to go down to this little magnifying glass, pop up, and then you have some options on the type of categories that you can search for. And I won't go too deep into this because, people don't necessarily need to know this or need to learn this. But the one thing that I am going to show is searching for public acts, which took me way too long to learn precisely how to do. So you'll often see reference to like Public Act 2310, like that's the format. So when you want to search for that, you go into Public Act, you select the year, which is 2023, and then you put the number 10, as opposed to putting, 23-10 in this thing. That won't come up with anything. So I don't actually know what 2310 is. I probably should have. And that's concerning cash refunds for gift card balances. So a big one. But for the purposes of this, we're just going to look for a bill, and we're just going to look at HB 5001 just as our example bill. And you can see that this is the House Dems priority. This is what this passed. This has a public act number, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, what I want people to be able to take away from this is to be able to find the most accurate version of the bill. There's obviously a lot of links here. There's a lot of bill texts here. If you wanted to share with a constituent or share with a colleague or share with someone what was in this bill, you have a lot of choices to pick from. Like you might think, oh, it's the committee bill because it's so obvious. But really, you just want to be looking for, when there's a public act and under the text of the bill, you just want to be clicking on the text of the bill, public act. This will give you the full, this is in law, this is in statute, this has been signed by the governor, and this is what is impacting the law. So again, very basic, very simple. And then when you go down here, if you want to look for the bill analysis, which is always super helpful, especially for us non-lawyers and lawmakers who are just looking for the bare bones, you always want to get the one that is the bill analysis for the bill number, and then as amended by House A and B, assuming there was an amendment, that will give you the correct thing. I think that's basically it. And then the same thing for fiscal notes. Fiscal notes and bill analysis will go by the same naming format. So it will always be this bill as amended by House A and B. So that's it. The timeline too. This is obviously, this is a bill that had a lot of stuff. So you don't have to worry that much about this, and you probably can all intuit like what the deal with this is. There is a point where kind of the committee process changes from the committee process, which will be covered later today, into the more broader legislative process. And that's right after the joint favorable and when it's filed with the LCO's office. Now I'm just going to run into the N drive, which is a super important tool that I feel like I've underutilized in the past.
Just one other quick thing. Again, things I wish I knew years ago. Other than public act, if it's a House joint resolution or Senate joint resolution, I think you would type in HJ or SJ. So if you see something that looks strange, like House joint, Senate joint, I think you just have to type in the HJ or A and the number, and you can find it. That's usually like when it's a nomination or a special type of legislation.
We're going to go into the House Dems N drive. So this is something that everyone has access to. For almost all of you, it should be your N drive. For clerks, it is a different letter because the clerk N drive is the committee data. But for most of you, this should be HDO data, and so in this, you're going to have a few different things that you want to focus on. I won't get into all of it. Some of it is like things that you will use as CECs or outreach or press, but I'm just going to focus on the parts that are for the legislative process that will kind of help you figure that part out. Specifically, if you go into the useful information, again, this is going to be mostly contact forms. One of the things that are in here, though, is the nonpartisan staff committee assignments. This is where you would find something like that. So if you wanted to reach out to someone in LCO and find out what committees they were covering, or you wanted to ask OLR a question and you wanted to ask it to the correct OLR staff member, you'd be able to find which committees they cover and get their contact info. So this is where you would find that. I think that's basically it in here for the legislative process specifically. And then we're going to go into the policy 2023, which will probably be your greatest treasure trove when you're looking for info about the legislative process. Mainly, you're going to find the public act summaries in here. So our amazing policy team, will go through after every session and every public act that we established. They will write a summary about it. So this will be where you can find that type of thing. You'll also find kind of talking points and other things in these end of session reports, which CECs and outreach are probably hyper familiar with because of the end of session newsletters that we just finished and put out. So that is where you will find talking points, summaries, things that we'll do like that. And it's all in the end drive, and it's all in the policy section. Let's see. Again, this is more for the committee process, but I'll note it just the same. There are some public hearing summaries in here as well. So for the public hearings that we run, if you're a legislator or you're a staff member and you want to know what people were talking about at a public hearing, you can find the summaries in there. 2023 CECs, again, there's a lot of useful information in there for CECs, but for the purposes of the legislative process, there are some sample letters and sample responses that might be helpful for you as we kind of get into the process. And as people start writing in about bills, you start getting form letters. Your legislators are asking you to write a response to constituents who are writing about things. This is just a good place to find stuff like that. So free bus service, if you look in here, the nonprofit funding response, health facility staffing, that will help you in that. That's basically it.
Yeah.
I think that's basically it. And if you go through some of these folders and you're looking for some of this information and you can't find it within, 15 minutes, that might be a good time to reach out to a staffer, but this is a really good first point of reference.
Everyone, I'm going to first go over the bill tracking process. The bill tracking is a tool that not enough legislators and not enough CECs or people use. If you just go to the main CGA page and just scroll down, you will find bill tracking right here, and you just press enter employees. And I'm going to create a list called example.
Justin's screen is still being shared.
I'm using Justin's thing. We're all good.
Oh, you're not sharing.
Sorry. Thank you. I'm going to re-show where it is. So CGA page, bill tracking is right here. And then we press enter employees, and I made a list called example. And one of the most important things for bill tracking, I really think legislators should do this themselves rather than asking their CECs to do this entirely, because it is often the case that legislators will ask for a large amount of bills to be tracked. And there's so much information that the CECs get in the bill tracking information that they do not know what is the important information to pass on to the legislators. And if they pass it all on, it's too much. And the legislators just you can't pay attention to it all. And you might as well just do it yourself, because only you know which bills are really important to you. So if you are having your CEC do this, either give them a short list of bills that you want to be tracked, or do it yourself. And what you can do is you can get an action report every time there's an action on a bill, or every day. And because if there's too much information, you just can't pay attention to what is important. And what is most important is when a bill gets a public hearing and when a bill is referred to another committee. So the reason why I say I think legislators should do it themselves is the CC might not know which bills the legislator may want to submit testimony on, or may want a constituent to submit testimony on. Only the legislator will generally know exactly that information. And so if you do it yourself, you'll be able to see when that happens. And I emphasize recognizing when a bill is referred to another committee. That is a really important thing, because if your bill is referred to another committee after the committee deadlines in a week, that committee needs to vote to approve that bill, or else that bill will end up dying. And if the committee chairs are not told how important this bill referral is, it will often die just because they don't know that this is an important thing. So if you use the bill tracking process, you find out this bill is important, you tell the chairs that this bill is a priority for you, it has a much better chance of staying alive. Yes, Rep. Hughes?
Yeah, well, can you just click on it and do an example so we can see? Because I've had trouble getting it to really work for me.
So one of the things that I wanted there's a couple of ways to track bills. One, you can track bills by co-sponsors. So if you, for Rep. Hughes, I could just track all the bills that Rep. Hughes has co-sponsored. And as I was saying, that can be, if you co-sponsor a lot of bills, that can lead to too much information if you're having your CC do it. But if you're doing it yourself, I think it's a fine way to do it. We can also track bills by just adding a bill to the list like this, add 5001, now we're tracking 5001. And one thing that I see a lot of people not use that I think is actually one of the most useful tools is tracking a keyword. And the reason why I am in favor of tracking keywords is because if you submit a proposed bill during a session, it is very normal for that proposed bill to die and then be turned into a committee bill. But then if you are tracking bill 5,200 200, which is probably a random proposed bill, and that bill was turned into a committee bill, the bill tracking process will not tell you that bill was turned into a committee bill because your bill is dead. The committee bill is a totally separate bill. So what I like to, here's my example of tracking endometriosis. And so if we're tracking this keyword, we can see some bills that were proposed bills that died 6297, 6375. These are two bills that were proposed that didn't go anywhere. And so if you were tracking these bills, you would never know that the bill was actually raised as 6672. But if you were tracking the keyword, you will get all the information. Keyword process is not perfect. You can misspell it like I just did, or you can sometimes use a word that just happens to not be used in the title or the statement. But I find it as one of the more useful ways to track the bills. And I clicked view list because this is, if you get like a bill report, this is what the information that you get. Every time one of these things is added to it, you get a notification. So this is one of the reasons why I was saying it can be a little bit excessive, because you'll get a notification every time it is referred to OLR, then referred to OFA, and every time it gets a thing. And so there's so much information that the CCs get if you're having your CC do that they don't know what they're supposed to tell you. And so that's why the CCs should track their legislators' bills just so that they can also remind them. But let's have two people doing it just so that it's less likely that something will fall through the cracks.
So when it says at the top, save as CVS, track bills, or PDF, the CVS allows you, CSV, whatever it is, allows you to sort.
You get it in like this format. You get like a web link, and you can do things like sorting by the House action, sorting here. And like, I prefer the web link rather than the PDF because you can sort by like what was the latest action, when was the public hearing date, when was the last committee action, and things like that. But yeah, and so that's in the that's in PDF or hyperlink. And like the way I do this, I don't like to get my text message. I don't like to get a text message. I like to do it only when I do all bills, but it makes sense for most people to do only bills with an action. And you can also generate a report just every weekday, and it'll give you like the latest actions on the bills. And it makes it, the bill tracking tool is, I think, one of the most useful tools that is extremely underutilized. And now I'm just going to talk about how to advocate for bills. So with the, in the legislative session, when a legislator, when you have a bill that you want to get more information on, oftentimes the legislator will ask their CC just for more information. And so one of the things that I suggest that everyone do is utilize the policy team. If you ask us about a bill that is one of our committees, we can tell you who the proponents are, who the opponents are, just like the political background information, and telling you who you should be talking to in order to get a bill passed, or who is the main person advocating for this, who you can work with on a bill. So, and one of the other main things that you need to do is, if you have a bill that you have proposed and you've sent it to the chairs, the legislators need to follow up with the chairs to let the chairs know that this is important to them. And if you submitted like 5 bills, it's very important to prioritize, because if you've submitted a bunch of bills, things will fall through the cracks. The legislators can only get so many bills, and if they've not heard about a bill since it was first proposed, and they've not been told how important this bill is, and the LCOs are telling them, you've given us so many bills, we can't draft all these bills, it's too much that you're asking us to draft, they will start to prioritize. So you should tell them about the bills that are actually important to you, because a lot of the times the bills are just a constituent asked a legislator to propose an idea, and the legislator may or may not think it's a good idea. And if you don't care about the bill, and you're okay with it dying, then let it die. But if there's a bill that you really care about, you need to let them know in the committee area. And after that, letting leadership know that a bill is important to you is important, because that can make an impact on whether or not that bill, they need to know whether or not there are people who actually care about this bill in order to get it called. But one of the most important things is to work with the chairs. You come to the policy people to know, not because we will get the bill passed, but we will tell you who to contact to get it passed, who are the proponents. And if you have a bill that you have a proposed amendment to, or you have a proposed way to improve the bill, coming to the policy person is a good idea, just so that we can tell you if that idea has already been considered, if there was an issue with that idea. And then we will also tell you, once again, the background, who are the proponents, who you should be talking to. Because if it's a Senate bill and it was Senator Duff's bill, we can say we think that's a great idea. Actually, let's go back to a bill that we already talked about, Public Act 10, which is a very important bill, Justin, the gift cards. I could tell you that if you wanted to advocate for this bill, I would tell you this was Senator Miller's bill, and she had proposed this bill in the past, and that this was a priority for her. And I could give you the background information that this bill has been proposed for many years. We had already done some work on this bill. And if you want to advocate for this bill, speak to her, speak to Rep. Doucette. But I would tell you, like, this bill, since it's a chair priority of the committee, is likely moving forward in the Senate. And if you had an improvement, speak to Senator Miller about that possible improvement. And when you are working on bills right now for the upcoming session, the ideal is to get it fully ready before the session. If you can work with OLR, if you can work with LCO to get something drafted for the beginning of session, that can speed things up and can just make the committee process much smoother, because it is, for the chairs, they are much less likely to want to kill a bill if all the work has already been done before the session has even begun. If a bill is a lot of work, it's much more likely to fall through the cracks if you've already. So I always suggest work on your bills now.
All right. So I'm going to piggyback a little bit on some of the stuff that Will was talking about as far as advocating for bills, but I'm going to talk about expressing concerns with bills. And this is mainly for legislators. And there's two times when you would probably be expressing concerns. One of them would be during the committee process, if you actually sit on that committee. And then the other part would be later on when we're getting ready to vote on bills in the chamber. But the most important thing is, before expressing concerns about a bill, you need to confirm that your interpretation of the bill is correct. So you might be getting emails from constituents complaining about a specific bill, but a lot of the times that is not a reflection of what the bill actually does. So I would talk to the policy person, I would talk to the clerk of that committee, I would talk to the committee chair, just to confirm that your interpretation is right and to confirm that the bill is still alive. Because with, all the deadlines and everything, especially next year in a short session, a bill may be voted out of committee where something important is taken out, and you might be getting calls about the part that was taken out. So, make sure that your interpretation is correct and the bill is still alive. So if you have confirmed all of those things, you want to talk to your committee chair, and no surprises is the most important thing. If you're on the committee, talk to the chair or the vice chair. They should know how you were planning to vote in the actual JF meeting. So it's really important when your committee has caucuses before voting. It's usually maybe the morning of a meeting, or sometimes they'll do it the night before on Zoom. It's very important that you go to these caucuses, and before the meeting, you need to let your chair know how you plan on voting on the bill, just so that there aren't any surprises and the chair can prepare for something like that. And if you're planning to introduce an amendment, the chair should know that as well. Then, after the bills are voted out of committee, now we're talking more about bills that are floating around and may end up being voted on in the chamber. And first of all, you could communicate some of your concerns with House Dems leadership, specifically the co-chairs of screening. Right now, Reps Conley and Elliott are the chairs of screening. You could talk to them. You could talk to the clerks or our legislative attorneys who sit in on House Dem screening. But again, no surprises. Maybe find out other members of our caucus who might have similar concerns about a specific bill. And then, your last chance to voice any concerns about a bill is going to be the House Dems caucus. Speak up in caucus. That is really the last line of defense right there. Vote counting is going to happen, and, you need to stick to your yes or no vote on the bill. You want to be credible in the eyes of leadership. And, if they're expecting you to vote yes on a bill and then the board lights up and you vote no, it's a big problem. So, just to conclude on expressing concerns, I really think the most important part is that time is of the essence. When you are talking to chairs, don't just send them an email, and then if they don't respond, that's the end of it. You might want to give them a call on the phone or shoot them a text. Don't necessarily rely on your CEC to do that work for you. You want your chair to be on the same page as you, and you want leadership to understand how you're going to vote on something. So I'm going to talk about the nonpartisan offices, and I'm going to start with the nonpartisan list. It's in the N drive under useful information. And this list usually gets emailed out. I think Zoe might have sent it out this year in January with all of the, okay, so these are all the different committees and the 3 nonpartisan offices, OLR, LCO, and OFA. And I'm going to go into each one of them. Thanks, Justin. All right. So I'm going to talk about LCO. First of all, they're the Legislative Commissioner's Office. They're all lawyers. They're all, well, first of all, wait, let me start again. I'm sorry. So the Legislative Commissioner's Office are all of our lawyers, and they write all of our bills, and they write all the amendments to our bills. Even if our caucus attorneys, write a bill or an amendment, it then goes to LCO, and, they have to review it. And then the bill in its final form or the amendment in its final form are written by LCO. The LCO attorneys sit in on all of the committee screening meetings. If I would say that you probably wouldn't talk to LCO that much unless you were part of committee leadership. But if you're working on an amendment for a bill that is coming up in the chamber, you might want to reach out to LCO and have them put together the amendment for you, or you could reach out to one of our attorneys and they'll work on it, but then they'll also submit it to LCO. And LCO has a website that you can access from the main page here. You go to offices, and then it's not. All right, can you? Yeah, of course. Okay. So you go to offices on the main page, and all the offices I'm going to talk about right now are on here. So here is the OFA link, and here's the LCO link, and this is the OLR link over here. So this is the LCO website. Their main number internally is extension 8410. You wouldn't really be talking to them that much. OLR is really the one that I deal with the most, and that a lot of CECs and legislators will reach out to as well. OLR, they're responsible for bill analyses for all the bills that are voted out of committee, and for all the bills that we amend in the chamber, and all of our public acts. You'll find a bill analysis for all of that. But one of the more important things that OLR does is reports. And there's 3 different kinds of asks that you can do to OLR. And you need to be careful about the wording that you use if you reach out to OLR. Scope and time frame are really important. What are you really looking for? So the vast majority of emails that I send to OLR, I'll say, this is very informal. I don't want one of your big reports on this. I just want you to answer something off the top of your head. And these kinds of asks are short, they're by email, and they're not reviewed internally by OLR. But if you need like a quick question about something related to one of your topics, I'll say something like, I just need a very informal response. Like, don't go out of your way for me on this, get back to me in a day or 2. And they're usually very appreciative of that. And then the next level are e-responses, and they're done by email. They're reviewed, but they're not published on the OLR website. So they're a little bit more formal than, the informal emails. But because they are reviewed, OLR analysts can go back and they can look at past e-responses. But like I said, they're not searchable on the main system. And then, the most formal are the reports that are published on the OLR website. And they're reviewed, they're published. The legislator's name attached to them isn't published, but usually when I call them, they ask, who is this on behalf of? And these reports are searchable on the OLR website, but I actually find that the best way to do it is just to reach out to your OLR person for whichever committee this is for and say, hey, do you have any reports out there about climate change or whatever it may be? And they'll say, okay, here's a list of all the reports that we've done in the last few years about this specific topic. And they're very proactive too. So the OLR analysts will they'll update a lot of their past reports in the off months, and they write reports that they think that people might be asking for, in addition to the reports that legislators are actually requesting. But it's very, very important that you understand the different levels as far as scope and time frame when you talk to OLR. And OLR, they talk to a lot of CECs and legislative aides around the building, and CECs can feel free to reach out to OLR if they have some questions. They're very, very useful. I reach out to them all the time. And I'm going to show a couple of tools that I use on the OLR website all the time.
Chris,
that I
before
find-
you do that,
Uh-huh.
this is Rep. Porter. I just wanted to ask to confirm, you're saying e-responses as in the letter E for email?
Yeah, e-responses.
Okay.
So yeah, the
All right.
first level is the informal emails, and then the second
Right.
level is the e-responses. And you could just say, I want an e-response, and they'll review it internally, but they won't publish whatever they send to you on their website.
And
And
what would be the thing that they publish and put on the website?
The thing that they publish are the actual reports that they do, where you have to say to them, I want you to put together a report for me. And usually, it takes a little bit of time, like weeks or so. So it's important to tell them, when you would like that back.
Right, okay.
And that's more of like an off session kind of thing. I mean, they do write reports during session as well, but that's more of an off session ask for them.
Okay, so e-responses versus the actual official reports, and the preference is off session.
Right, but if you still need one done during session, you can ask them and they have to do it.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. So one of the things that I use a lot on our website is this acts affecting button. And so all this is all of the public acts that have to deal with a specific topic for the year that they were passed. And, they're very broad topics like, people with disabilities, housing and real estate, seniors, et cetera. And there is overlap in between these a little bit too, but you can go really far back in time. So, very recently, somebody asked me for a list of all the bills related to climate change that we passed the last 5 years. So, I would go into acts affecting, and I would click on environment. And in here, you have OLR summaries of all the different bills related to the environment that we passed out in 2023. And they have that for every year going pretty far back. And this is very useful if I'm in a pinch and a legislator, has a question like that. The other thing that I use very often is under special reports here. You scroll down, you see it says 2023 bill tracking, 2022 bill tracking. What this is, as you know, there are lots of concepts in proposed bills or bills that get passed out of committee. And then when we eventually pass them in the House and Senate, they end up in a different public act number than the bill in which they first appeared. And what this whole list is in the first column, it's the original bill. And then the second column is the public act number in the section in which it actually appears. And this is very useful. I took a look at this for this year, and I don't cover education, but education had a whole lot of these where all of these different concepts appeared in all of these bills, but then ended up as these public acts. And again, this is very, very useful because a lot of our bills start and end in different places.
Chris, I use, like, for instance, the summary of acts affecting seniors all the time when I go out in the off session to senior communities. They love this stuff. I get copies of it. I don't hand it out to necessarily every person, but the stack that I bring always goes like that. So I would, even if you're not on aging or you're not on children and you're going out into the community, grab a bunch of those that are of interest to your constituents, and they love this. They love being part of it.
Jason?
What's the difference between a bill and a public act?
A public act is if the bill has been signed, it has been passed out of both chambers and signed by the governor, it becomes a public act.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah, so one thing I was just going to share is I know OLR has like a search page, and you can search it and it ends up getting like a lot of hits depending on what keyword you use. But OLR themselves told me a lot of times before calling them, if you just actually use Google and you do OLRCT and search whatever you're looking for, Google actually will sort it by relevance and prioritize it. So you'd be surprised if you just type in OLRCT and what you're looking for, a lot of times you'll find a report that's already been done before you've even asked OLR, and you'll find what you're looking for. And if not, they can always update it too. But that was one of their suggestions too, using Google as opposed to their own search engine.
And just because I think like this is probably one of the most helpful sections of like all of the legislative process training. A lot of it has to do with like the type of question you're asking and like the level of satisfaction that you need in the answer, right? So like, I think one point to everybody is like, you can ask clerks all sorts of questions. They're in the room in all these meetings. They kind of know the status of these bills. They have a good handle on like what's in and what's out. And like, you know, you can go to them and ask that type of question. Then you can kind of go to policy and like talk through some of the politics of it. Like policy analysts have like read and analyzed the bill. They can point you to these, you know, summaries, and whether that feels like official or not, or you need some kind of neutral thing, you can also go to OLR and you can kind of anticipate like where you should go based on what the question is. So if you went to Chris and said, you know, hey, what's going on with this bill and environment, Chris would know it really well. And if you said, well, what does Kentucky do or something, you know, Chris is going to turn around and talk to OLR, right? And, you know, that's something that everyone else sort of has that same access to that resource. And then similarly, I think it was Rep Hughes was talking about like all these resources are just sort of available to everyone all the time. And I think we're seeing more of this as sort of outreach is more active and doing more events and stuff. But like we have this wealth of information by OLR on that is categorized by subject. And as Chris, I think, pointed out earlier, like you can go on the N Drive too and get summaries there where our policy department will categorize different themes or go right down to an individual bill. And then another point on just sort of like some of the historical questions. Some, you know, if you're a clerk if you have a clerk who's been in a committee for many years, you can kind of go to them and say, hey, you know, what's the history of this bill? And they would know it well. But occasionally, you know, we get a lot of requests that are like, hey, did we do something a few years ago on a certain subject? And policy can be really helpful in navigating that sort of search bar that you had shown, but this is also tools that you can use on the website yourself. And OLR can kind of do the history of a given subject for you. And then if you really want to dig up something extraordinarily old, OLR is connected to the library, and Chris Jackson, who will be doing the later in the day chamber process stuff, frequently works with them and can dig up special acts from, you know, the 19 teens or whatever. So that sort of level of like, you know, I could ask Jay Knight a question about a bill, or like Will intimately knows bank card or gift card fund balances, right? But I had someone ask me about the educational interests of the state statutes that have evolved many times since like the 80s, and we only recently did something to those statutes. So that's it. Hopefully that's appreciated.
Yeah, I want to expand on the legislative library too. So the legislative library is part of OLR, and they also cover all of the boards and commissions. So if you have any questions related to boards and commissions, you can go to the legislative library. Also, the executive branch submits a lot of reports to the legislative branch, and the legislative library is CC'd on all of those reports. So if you're looking for something like that, the legislative library is a great tool. And also, you know, the third nonpartisan office is OFA, the Office of Fiscal Analysis, and they mainly work with the money committees. The majority of their work is with appropriations and finance, because their job is to determine the cost and a revenue gain or loss for the state and for municipalities. It's not their job to determine the cost to the consumer. It's just the cost or revenue gain or loss to towns and to the state for a specific bill. They only write fiscal notes for bills that are passed out of committee or any proposed amendments on the House floor. So LCO will do an amendment, but then we need to wait on OFA to do a fiscal note before we can introduce that amendment from the House floor. And even if there is no cost or no revenue gain or loss, OFA still has to do a report that says there is no cost to this. And OFA is a little bit different in that they're assigned to state agencies, not to committees. So you'll see on the nonpartisan list, you know, it's broken down by different committees. But if, you know, a bill for one of those committees affects an agency that wouldn't normally be associated with that committee, they might bring on one of their other analysts to work on that specific section or that specific bill. But, the most important thing about the nonpartisan jobs is that they are nonpartisan. So you're not going to get, the good ones are not going to, give you a political opinion about a bill or, make a value judgment about a bill. You can go to them for, their non-biased opinion, but they go out of their way to appear as nonpartisan as possible. And it goes into their personal lives too. They cannot, in order to work in one of those offices, they can't have ever been political in their past. So you can't go and work for House Dems and then one day go and work in one of the nonpartisan offices, because then, people would say then, this person worked for House Dems, they're not nonpartisan, they're Democratic. They could be registered with a political party, but that's it. They can't be involved in, town politics or anything like that. And they're very, very careful about all of that stuff.
I want to go back to OLR for 1/2 a sec. And this question has to do with what Ann Hughes said, which I thought was a great suggestion. If we are visiting, for her example, senior citizens, how do we share this information? Are we saying this list right here? Okay, so it says education, and then there's a list of public acts and bills. Let's just pretend, for example, that that's about seniors. What do we actually hand out? Maybe Anne can answer that question. And whose responsibility is it to print up? Like, do we ask OLR to provide it? Do we ask our CEC to provide it? Do we do it ourselves? What's the process here, please? Thank you.
I'm going to jump in. So, your CEC can absolutely navigate this stuff and prepare any information that they can find on the website or EnDrive, and that's like a wholly appropriate thing. Definitely encourage people to work with their outreach coordinators who tend to have a good handle on coordinating the event and preparing for it. We have a graphics department or a communications department who will design cover sheets for you. I don't know if D'Amico's on, but he's a good person to throw under the bus. He'll frequently be like, hey, I'm going to speak to the Board of Education at 7 p.m. today. And could I get a couple talking points too? So that kind of spills over to like, you want to reach out to policy and we'll loop in press and we'll kind of clean up something too. Like, it sort of depends on what the event is. A lot of reps will just show up to something where they know are a lot of seniors and they'll bring that official OLR book. But we can prepare any kind of range of work product, especially, and then the more in advance too, the more we can kind of put our own House Dems fingerprints on it.
Okay, thank you very much.
I don't think there was a question about filling out a form for a formal report for OLR. I don't recall having to fill out a form or anything like that. They just want to know the time frame, the scope, and which legislator is requesting it. And when you do those kinds of requests, usually the turnaround time isn't a day or two. Yeah, Zoe?
There actually is a form online that you can submit a request, but if you know the OLR analyst, I would recommend going directly to them, because when you submit a request, the turnaround time is a lot slower than if you just reached out to the analyst directly.
Yeah, and if I was doing something like that, I would go through the nonpartisan list. If there were multiple OLR analysts for that committee, I would then just send out an email to, all of them for that committee and say, this is the report that such and such rep wants. This is the scope. They need a couple of weeks, and then that's it.
Quick question.
Yep.
It's my understanding that bills automatically get referred to OFA to ascertain a fiscal note. Is that true? We don't request a fiscal note, correct?
No, it's all the bills that get voted out of committee. It automatically triggers OFA to go and do the fiscal note. So none of the proposed bills or committee bills get a fiscal note until they're actually voted out. And then on the flip side, any amendments that we do from the House floor or Senate floor, once the amendment goes live in the system, OFA then has to race to do up the fiscal note. And then we can't introduce that amendment until the fiscal note is online.
Because lots of times in committee discussions, people talk about what is this going to cost the state? And there's a lot of guesswork. So you're saying there's no way to get a fiscal note before the committee discusses the bill?
Well, I suppose you could reach out to the OFA analyst ahead of time and ask them how much they think it's going to cost, or if there's going to be any change in revenue. And they could get back to you, just like in the off months, if you're planning on, introducing some kind of a bill next year, like this time of year would be a great time to reach out to OFA and say, this is what I'm looking to do. What do you think the fiscal impact is going to be?
Okay, thank you very much.
Just to rip on that for a second too. You can always ask them for back of the envelope number. A lot of them will be really reluctant to give you something that like you can put on paper or share with your colleagues. They're also just, especially when it's like less formal, that they're going to reach out to an agency and ask them what they think. So you also have that ability to say, hey, Department of or Deep or something, what do you think something like this would cost? And then lastly, when it's a brand novel idea, it can be really hard to guess what the fiscal note would be. But if it's a bill that comes up every year or it's had different iterations, you can sometimes go back and look at old file copies that came out of or old amendment fiscal analyses and look up what those costs, and depending on what iteration you're working with, you can at least approximate.
I have a broader question about bills. What are the limitations or requirements for any bills that we would introduce in the short session?
They have to be of a budgetary nature in the short session. If they're not, they would have to be committee bills. So you have to lobby your House co-chair for that committee. And I would, you could send them a letter, but honestly, you want to talk to them on the phone and you want to let them know as soon as possible. Because a lot of, at least the chairs that I work with, a couple of them are already working on a lot of bills for next year. So, this is the time to start reaching out about that kind of thing. There was one thing that I wanted to add about OLR. So if you're a CEC, some of them will reach out to a state agency and OLR, or even with OFA, a little bit less. But if you reach out to a state agency and then you reach out to OLR, tell OLR that you already reached out to the state agency, because they talk to them and OLR has a confidentiality requirement with you, and OLR won't be caught off guard if you tell them, that you already talked to the state agency. And sometimes the agencies will try to figure out where the ask is coming from. So if you asked the agency the exact same question and you don't tell the OLR analyst, the agency might be able to figure out which legislator it's coming from. So OLR and OFA and LCO are binded by confidentiality, which you don't get, with the, with the state agencies. But OLR is really your friend in this. But you don't want any surprises.